All right, welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive.
Huh.
Today, we're looking at something that I think is super applicable to almost everybody listening, and that is building wealth.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, building wealth in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So we've got a source here that lays out what it calls simple money rules.
Okay.
But as we dug into this, we realized it was kind of more than just a list of rules. It's really kind of a philosophy,
Yeah.
a whole approach to how to think about building wealth.
I like that.
And, one of the things that really jumped out at me at the beginning was this idea that money's greatest advantage isn't necessarily just having more of it.
Right.
It's the control over your time that it provides.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to frame it.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes we think about money as just like the end goal. Like if I just had X amount of dollars, then I would be happy or I would be set or whatever.
Right.
But really what money provides is freedom and options and control over your time.
Yeah. And it's not even just like free time for leisure necessarily. It's also the ability to say no to things you don't want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And to say yes to things you do and to potentially pursue passions or other, opportunities, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's dive into some of these rules. The first one is money is a tool. And I have to admit, when I first read that, it was kind of like, I never really thought of money that way.
Yeah.
I always thought of it as something you earn and you spend, not as a tool. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, I think it's a really powerful reframe because it kind of shifts your perspective from being a passive recipient of money to thinking about how can I use this proactively to create the life that I want. So, for example, you can use money as a tool to buy assets like real estate or stocks.
Right.
You can use it to pay off debt and free up your cash flow. You can use it to increase your savings for future goals. You can even use it to launch that side hustle you've been dreaming of.
Yeah, or to invest in yourself to learn new skills,
Exactly.
to, travel or whatever it is that is important to you. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really about thinking about how can I use this resource that I have to create more freedom and more options in my life.
Okay, so that brings us to the next rule, which really caught my eye. And it's this idea of separating your time from money.
Okay.
And the quote from the source is, "The most rewarding earnings are those that don't involve your efforts."
Yeah.
Which is a really kind of...
That's a bold statement.
It is a bold statement, and it kind of goes against the grain of how we're often taught to think about earning money.
It does, and I think this is where the idea of passive income comes in.
Okay.
And so can you talk a little bit about passive income?
Yeah, so passive income is basically the idea of generating income without directly trading your time for it.
Yeah.
So like the classic example is owning a rental property.
Right.
You collect rent every month. You're not actively working for that income at that point.
Exactly.
But obviously you had to put in the work up front to buy the property to manage it.
Of course, yeah.
And, deal with all of that.
There's always work involved to get to that point.
Right.
But then over time, you can kind of step back from that a little bit,
Right.
and the income continues to flow.
Right.
And so other examples would be like dividends from stocks or, creating an online business that generates income passively.
Or even, something like creating an online course or an ebook.
Right.
Where you create it once and then people can buy it.
Yeah, and you can sell it over and over again without you having to individually deliver that service.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of the promise of passive income.
Exactly.
And it really does tie back to this idea of separating your time from money. So I love that concept. But I think for a lot of people, it also feels kind of daunting, right? Like,
it does.
How do you even get started with that?
Yeah, it can feel very overwhelming. Because it's like, well, I'm so busy just trying to make ends meet. How am I supposed to create this passive income stream? And so I think it starts with really thinking about what are your skills and your interests?
Right.
What are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? Because the best passive income ideas are going to be things that you're passionate about.
Right.
That you're actually interested in spending time on, because it's going to take some time and effort up front to build these streams of income. But once you have them in place, the potential rewards in terms of your time freedom and your financial independence are really significant.
Absolutely. And I think there's also something to be said for not just thinking about what skills can I monetize, but also what problems can I solve?
That's a great point.
Because a lot of times the best business is the best. Passive income streams come from identifying a need that people have and then figuring out a way to solve it.
Absolutely. And I think that really speaks to this next rule, which is about taking ownership of your financial well-being.
Right. The source says own it. which is pretty blunt. Take personal responsibility.
Mm.
Don't blame external factors.
Yeah.
And I think that's a tough message for some people to hear.
It is, especially in today's world where it's so easy to point fingers and blame, the economy or the government or
Yeah.
whatever for our financial struggles.
Totally.
But the truth is, our financial future is largely within our control.
Right.
And the sooner we accept that and take action, the better positioned we'll be to achieve our goals.
Yeah, and it's not about ignoring the realities of systemic issues
Of
or
course.
humologies that people face.
Right.
It's about saying, okay, within the context of my own life,
Mm-hmm.
what are the things that I can control?
Mm-hmm.
And what are the things that I can't?
Mm-hmm.
And let me focus my energy on the things that I can control.
Exactly. And I think that ties in really well with the next rule as well, which is about not confusing wealth with possessions.
Right.
And the source cautions against being flashy and emphasizes the importance of being frugal.
Yeah, there's this idea that we often confuse wealth with stuff.
Yes.
Right. Like, we think if I just have the fancy car, the big house, the designer clothes, then I'll be wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is, often those people are drowning in debt.
Right.
And they're not actually wealthy at all.
Exactly. True wealth is about financial stability, security, and freedom. And that often comes from living below your means, being intentional with your spending and investing for the long term.
Yeah, it reminds me of that saying, don't keep up with the Joneses. They're probably broke.
Exactly.
Right. Like you never know what's going on behind closed doors.
Right. Appearances can be deceiving.
So we're taking control.
Yeah.
We're being mindful of our spending.
Right.
Where do we go from here? What's the next step?
Well, I think the next rule is really crucial, and it's about playing your own game.
Okay.
And this is about defining your own financial goals and understanding your risk tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your priorities in life? What are you working towards?
Yeah.
And what level of risk are you comfortable with? Because not everyone is going to have the same financial goals.
And not everyone is going to be comfortable with the same level of risk.
Right.
So it's not about blindly following advice. It's about creating a personalized financial strategy that aligns with your values and aspirations.
Yeah. You mentioned personalized guidance a couple of times now.
Mm-hmm.
How important is it to actually seek out advice from a financial professional?
I think it can be incredibly valuable, especially when you're dealing with more complex financial instruments
Mm-hmm.
or you're planning for major life events.
Okay.
So, for example, if you're thinking about buying a home or investing in the stock market or planning for retirement,
Right.
it can be really helpful to have someone who can guide you through that process and help you make informed decisions.
Okay. So it sounds like it's not necessarily something you need to do right away, but as you start to,
It depends on your situation.
Yeah.
If you're just starting out and you're just trying to
Yeah.
get your basic finances in order, then you probably don't need to hire a financial advisor right away. But as you start to accumulate more wealth, as your financial situation becomes more complex, it can be really helpful to have that expert guidance.
Okay, so let's talk about some specific actions people can take to start putting these principles into practice.
Yeah.
The source emphasizes this concept of paying yourself first.
Right.
What does that mean?
So paying yourself first means prioritizing your savings and your investments before any other expenses.
Mm-hmm.
So before you pay your rent or your mortgage, before you buy groceries, before you go out to eat, you set aside a certain amount of money
Okay.
for your future self.
And that could be, even if it's a small amount,
Absolutely.
it's more about the habit.
It's the habit. It's the mindset shift. It's about saying my future is important to me
Right.
and I'm going to invest in it now.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, I used to think about saving as like, what's left over at the end of the month?
Right.
And of course, there never was anything left over.
Right.
But this is flipping that script and saying, no, that's the first thing I'm going to take care of.
Exactly.
And then I'll figure out the rest.
But, it doesn't have to be a huge amount. It could be $10 a week. It could be $100 a month, whatever you can afford. But that consistent commitment over time really adds up and it instills that really powerful mindset shift.
So for people who are listening and they're thinking, okay, that sounds great in theory, but I'm living paycheck to paycheck. I can't even imagine saving anything.
I understand that.
What would you say to them?
That's a really common situation. And it's not about deprivation. It's about finding ways to create even small margins in your budget.
Okay.
So could you bring your lunch to work a couple of times a week instead of eating out?
Right.
Could you cut back on that subscription service that you're not really using that much?
Right.
Could you maybe negotiate a lower rate on your cell phone bill? or your internet bill.
Yeah.
There are often ways to find little areas where you can save, even if it's just a few dollars here and there.
Right.
And that can add up over time, and it really helps to build that muscle of financial discipline.
Okay, so speaking of protecting your future self, the source also talks about the importance of an emergency fund.
Yes.
Why is that so crucial?
Well, think about a time when maybe
Yeah.
your car broke down unexpectedly,
Oh.
or you had a medical bill that you weren't anticipating,
Right.
or you lost your job.
Mm-hmm.
These things happen in life.
They do.
And if you don't have an emergency fund in place,
Yeah.
you're much more likely to end up in debt or to have to make financial decisions
Right.
that aren't in your best interest.
Yeah, you end up in a reactive state, where you're just kind of scrambling to put out fires.
And so an emergency fund is designed to provide that buffer
Right.
to protect you against those unexpected expenses.
Yeah. And it's not just about the financial protection, it's also about the peace of mind.
Absolutely.
Right.
It reduces your stress levels. It allows you to sleep better at night
Mm-hmm.
because you know that you have that safety net in place. And it gives you more confidence to make,
Yeah.
decisions that are in alignment with your values because you're not coming from a place of fear.
Right.
Okay, so this next rule is a little bit more philosophical,
Okay.
but I think it's really key, and it's ego is an impediment to wealth creation,
That's an interesting one.
right? And I think it's so true because our ego often drives us to overspend,
Mm-hmm.
to try to keep up with the Joneses, to seek validation through material possessions.
Right.
And true wealth is often built
Yeah.
on delayed gratification, disciplined saving, and smart investments.
Exactly. It's about being able to say no to those impulse purchases,
Right.
to resist the temptation to buy things that you don't need, to impress people that you don't even like.
Right.
It's about being in control of your emotions and not letting them dictate your financial decisions.
Yeah, it's a constant battle, though.
It is.
Right? Like, I think we all fall into the trap of,
Yeah.
wanting to keep up appearances or,
Yes.
just getting caught up in the moment.
And making an impulse purchase.
It's a human thing.
Right.
We all do it.
Yeah.
But the key is to be aware of it and to try to make conscious choices as much as possible.
So ultimately, it all boils down to this idea of living below your means, right? Resisting that temptation to have a lifestyle that you can't afford.
Exactly. It's about being intentional with your spending and aligning your lifestyle with your long-term financial goals. It might mean making some choices that aren't always glamorous or exciting, but the rewards are definitely worth it.
Absolutely. Any final tips on how to actually embrace that philosophy?
Yeah, I think a few practical steps can make a big difference.
Okay.
So first of all, start by setting clear financial goals. What are you actually working towards?
Right.
Because if you don't know where you're going,
Yeah.
it's going to be really hard to get there.
Yeah.
And then track your expenses for a month to see where your money is actually going.
Oh, yeah. That's always eye-opening.
You think you know where your money's going,
Yeah.
and then you actually track it, and you're like, oh, wow.
Yeah, it can be really surprising.
Okay.
And then create a budget that aligns with your goals. And track your net worth regularly to monitor your progress. And most importantly, be intentional with every dollar that you spend. Ask yourself, does this purchase bring me closer to my goals or further away?
That's a great question to ask. I love that.
It's a simple question, but it can really help you to make more mindful decisions.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways you want listeners to walk away with?
Well, I think it really comes down to a mindset shift. These aren't just rules. It's a philosophy for approaching wealth creation over the next decade.
Right.
It's about taking control of your finances, making informed choices, and recognizing that true wealth is about building a life of freedom and abundance, not just accumulating possessions.
I love that. And as you continue, on your wealth building journey, consider this. What are you willing to sacrifice today to achieve your financial goals tomorrow?
That's a great question.
It's a question worth pondering. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.